So tonight I'm here to talk about some strategies for arguing well in good faith with atheists. Though I'll admit, I think the strategies work pretty well for arguing with just about anyone, so you can take them out for a spin. And most people who are going to give you advice about arguments are going to give you advice about how to win an argument, how to construct an argument so that there's no way out for your opponent, how to back them into a corner and get them finally, eventually, to concede. My advice tonight is not going to be primarily about how to win an argument, but how to be prepared to lose an argument. And the reason is, when two people come into conflict, the only thing that's guaranteed is at least one of them needs to lose. But the fact that I disagree with someone else isn't a guarantee that I'm right just because I'm pretty sure they're wrong. So the only thing I know for sure once a disagreement starts, even if I'm very confident that I'm the one in the right, is that at the end of this, at least one of us needs to lose. And sometimes it does have to be me. I'm extremely fortunate that my friends helped me to learn how to lose an argument gracefully when I was in college and gave me the chance to listen to the prompting of the Holy Spirit and become Catholic. But without a tutoring in how to lose an argument, I don't know that I would have gotten there. And the moment you kind of launch yourself into a disagreement, you are your opponent's teacher in how to be prepared to lose. Or really, as Christians, how to be prepared to be docile to the truth. Because all of us have had moments of needing correction and needing to submit to that correction gratefully. And in an argument, what I want to do is give my opponent the chance to embrace that. I really saw this modeled for me very strongly when I went to Yale University as an undergrad and joined a debating circle. And I joined specifically the one that had the weirdest, smartest, wrong people that I could find. Because if I were going to argue with people who were right, we'd all just sit around, congratulating each other. And I wanted to talk to people who were really smart, seemed really respectable, and yet were Christian, which I found very confusing. So I thought helpfully I would go and explain to them why they shouldn't do that anymore. And then we could just continue being really smart, really interesting, really weird atheists. And instead, much to my surprise, here I am. And part of how that happened is that my debating group, wasn't exactly like, the debating groups you may have been in a competitive debate circuit where you take sides at random, argue in front of judges, score points, and it's really an exercise in rhetoric. How well can you construct an argument so that a judge can recognize that you've put one forward and your opponent didn't answer it? But we only debated things we thought were actually true. You stuck to the side you believed in. Because after all, it was kind of dangerous to stand there arguing for things you thought were false. What if you were really good at arguing them, and then people believed them, and then lived their lives that way? So that was always the stakes. There were no judges, no prizes. The stakes were the rest of the lives of everyone in the room, and it was always an open question. After tonight, how will you live your life differently? And the other thing that was great is that people really modeled that the expectation in this room was that, if you were smart, interesting, brought in good ideas to the table, at some point during your undergraduate career, you would change someone's mind. You would alter the course of their whole life. But the assumption was also probably that you would at some point find something that you, when entering college as an 18-year-old, were wrong about and would make that concession and change your life accordingly. Sometimes that might be on enormous, entire worldview-altering things like me, who changed my mind about religion. Sometimes people made smaller concessions about how a hypothetical monarchy should be structured. So I won't say we were always debating for the highest stakes, but there was always an assumption that debate involved putting your ideas on the line and putting them at risk. Now, hopefully you guys here tonight are willing to do that, and folks on the live stream are, but your interlocutor may not. So here's kind of my strategy for inviting someone into a debate in which you're willing to really be vulnerable and be docile to the truth. And it starts with giving up any trick or tool of rhetoric that works no matter whether the ideas you're using to support it are true. That means something like kind of keeping up the pace of the argument so your opponent can't keep up, and when they run out of breath, you go, oh, so you're wrong, yes? I didn't have an answer for me. I think that means you're wrong and I win. All set? It means even expecting you can resolve things in a single encounter, a single argument. It's much easier to be kind of bullied into thinking something wrong in a single argument, but the truth is true enough to stand, to put it out there, to cast the seed on whatever ground it may find, and to let the shoots grow. And in my case, there was one definitive argument near the end of my conversion that kind of turned the key, but it had been 4 years of arguments, a lot of books that were added to my bookshelf to get to the point where the soil was prepared for that argument. Defending the truth is a relay race, not a sprint. And it's only people who don't believe that the truth will keep asserting itself that need to close off an argument in one go. Because if you don't get the concession now, you can't trust that the world is going to force the person to it. Now, I have trouble sticking to these principles in the heat of the argument because I am still competitive, and I do kind of get drawn towards that will not to be docile to the truth, but to dominate, to just be smarter than my opponent, more persuasive than my opponent, until finally they concede that and by I mean my ideas, are better than theirs. So the main thing that I found to be helpful in shifting my mindset so that I really can be open to the truth, the thing I'm allegedly trying to hand on to my opponent, is kind of stirring up two different emotions besides the will to dominate: curiosity and compassion. And for me, that movement towards curiosity is kind of a place I hopefully can get to even if I start angry. I try and approach an argument, by planning ahead and approaching it, praying for my interlocutor ahead of time. But sometimes I realize I'm in the middle of an argument while it's already happening and I'm already angry. And there, I'm struggling. I do try and pray in that moment, but it's really hard for me to get all the way from, how can you be so wrong, to, this person is a beloved child of God seeking the truth. And so I don't do it in one jump. I just try and go from, how can you be so wrong, to, how can you be so wrong? How are you doing it? I respect you in other parts of your life, and yet you're so wrong about this. It's infuriating, but also confusing. And for me, the biggest gift that gives me is that when I'm angry, all I want from my opponent is the concession. I want them to give up what they have, and I almost don't care about them. I just want that moment of, I'm sorry, Leah, you were right and I was wrong. I'm very embarrassed. But once I'm curious, that concession isn't enough. That sense of driving to annihilate them, which is not only sinful, is now no longer even the illusion of satisfying. Because I want to know something particular about this person. What are you thinking? How can you be so wrong? And I can't get it by bullying them. I have to leave space in the conversation to hear them unpack their ideas, so that I understand what's led them to this point and to this view, and to see where we diverge several steps further back to wind up with me, now a Catholic, and them still an atheist to date. And once I get there, it's no longer enough to shout over them, to just throw reading material at them. I have to want to know them. And if I can, I want to go one step further. Sometimes in the moment, I'm just like, Lord, if you just get me to curiosity, that would be enough. But if I can push a little further, I want to move from, how can you be so wrong, to, what are you in love with? Because St. Thomas Aquinas echoes Aristotle in saying no one does evil but for the sake of a perceived good. And whatever idea my interlocutor is defending, whatever has brought them to their particular philosophy, they're doing it because they're trying to be a good person and trying to be a truthful person. And so in order to be able to argue with them, to get that sense of how can you be so wrong, I have to look at what perceived good they're serving. And it might be a dumb perceived good. I think a number of my friends felt that way about me. Once they got past, oh, so you're an atheist. I'm like, well, yes, I am an atheist, but obviously that doesn't tell you how to live your life. What I am is a stoic deontologist. And I was about this height, I suppose, but younger looking. And it was a very strong claim to make. And then I tried to make everyone else stoic deontologists too. And so, no one who's trying to answer the question of my atheism would ever get to the meat of the matter by just going, why don't you believe in God? Because it wasn't my disbelief in God that was organizing my whole life. It was my desire to know truth and do good. And my ways of going about it were classical, but a little bonkers sometimes. So it was kind of by coaxing out that desire I had for truth, for goodness, and ultimately also for beauty, that my friends were able to make the argument against my atheism, not just by attacking the philosophical supports for atheism, not just by attacking Stoic deontology, because that only got me as far as virtue ethics, though that helped, but by really saying, you've got the right idea here, Leah. You should want to know the truth. You do want to do good. We just disagree about how you should be doing it. And when you can get to that point with someone, that point of agreement, the view of them really loving what you love, loving a perceived good that maybe is a true good, but they're serving it in a way that isn't ideal. Loving something that is only a perceived good, and the more you look at their fire of their love for it, the more you realize you want that love directed towards a true good. You could never want that moment of, I'm so sorry, Leah, I was wrong and you were right. I promise not to have any more feelings about anything unless you give me permission. Because I would have quashed that love. At worst, my opponents are like Don Quixote, nobly sallying forth to claim a washing basin as a helmet. And when I see the ardor of their love, I can't wish to strike their helmets, their philosophy simply out of their hands and leave them empty. I say, you are a beautiful lover, and you have chosen a very strange object for your love. But all I wish to do is kindle it and redirect it. And that's kind of always the opportunity we have when we find ourselves in the middle of an argument. It's not just a matter of defending the truth by itself. God is truth. God is sufficient. God doesn't need our defense. What the person we're arguing with needs is a chance to know the truth and to love the truth and to get a sense of what that entails. So when I'm doing this, I'm trying to help my opponent do what I'm doing, to have that sense of curiosity and compassion. But aside from sometimes making them go to my talks or having you guys convey these messages outside the fight, so that by the time you're fighting, they're already interested in how could you be so wrong. The other thing I find that really helps just is making arguments comfortable and making them part of my friendship. In our college debating group, we did debate once a week, Thursday night, from about 7:45 to I usually left by 1 or 2 a.m., so I can't say for sure how late we went. Debates were always part of a continuing conversation, sometimes till dawn, though usually not for me. But all debates are part of a continuing conversation. And so when you're in the middle of an argument with a friend, make it clear that it's safe for them to not resolve this today and to still be your friend, but that you're interested in continuing to talk about it. And if they come back and go, you know what, I thought of like 3 things I should have said to you, and I went and did some more reading, and now I have other things, you go, excellent, I anticipate we're going to argue about this for quite some time, so I'm glad we're both really investing in this relationship. Give your friend, kind of the comfort of knowing that when they show weakness or uncertainty, you won't take that as cowardice. So often someone might be on the cusp of admitting something that really has given them pause about their own ideas or their own philosophy, or something that truly tracks them about yours. But in every other argument to this point, the ones they've had, the ones they've seen on TV, the moment someone says, yeah, I do struggle with how to resolve that, is the moment the other person goes, so you're wrong and you're stupid. And if you want someone to know that it's safe to explore their doubts with you, you again have to be the one to model that by being willing to say, especially when someone asks you hard questions, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I'm going to have to go look that up, or, talk to the Dominican friars I know who seem to know everything, or do some more reading, or ask someone in the Word on Fire Institute forums. But I don't know that right now. Or even the harder thing, I think, than simple ignorance is, yeah, that bothers me, and I haven't figured out completely how to resolve it. That troubles me, and it's not enough to shift the balance of my faith, but you're right, that bothers me too. And it's kind of by giving that demonstration that we open the door for our interlocutors to share what are kind of the most private parts of their heart, what they truly love and they're trying to defend, and the fears they have that they might be doing the wrong thing. Because ultimately, whenever we find ourselves drawn into argument, the way I like to think of what our project is really drawn from a quote by Rebecca West in her book, Black Lamb, Gray Falcon, where she says, she contrasts kind of the argument culture of the West that she's used to, the argument culture of the Slavs, since she's traveling in Yugoslavia between the world wars. And she says, with her penchant for broad generalization about culture, in the West, conversation is thought to be an acceptable way of sharing information or passing the time. But among Slavs, it is thought to be a waste if the people do not pool their information to travel further towards the redemption of the world. And that's ultimately what I think every argument is. An argument is a chance to move towards the redemption of the world, towards making all things one in Christ. Whether it's an argument that obviously hinges on who he is when we speak to someone else about their disbelief and we try and get them to be interested in wondering whether Christ is in fact the way, the truth, and the life. Or even in the very small petty arguments where if you decided them by a coin flip, it would not matter, of who will bring the pie to Thanksgiving this year. Each of those is an invitation to renounce division and ask to be part of Christ's work of redemption of the world. Because ultimately, we want to be wholly docile to the truth, wholly submerged in it, and we want to be with God. And we want every single person we know and love, or don't love yet, but are at the anger stage, so we're hoping to move towards love through curiosity, to be there with us. And that means being wholly united before the beatific vision. And every argument closed eventually, and closed in love, is a small anticipation of that ultimate Easter glory. Thank you.